You have spent your life trying to be honest, trying to be authentic. You speak your mind, you act with integrity, and you refuse to mold yourself into something false just to fit in. But what happens when people around you aren't ready for that? What happens when your honesty makes them uncomfortable? When your strength exposes their weakness? When your presence reminds them of everything they've tried to avoid? There's a fundamental truth that people struggle to accept. Not everyone is built for truth. Many people construct their lives around illusions of who they are, what they want, and what they believe. They don't want to face reality because reality is difficult. It's filled with responsibility, with consequence, with the weight of their own choices. And when you show up, when you refuse to lie to them, when you refuse to play their game, they see you as a threat, not as a friend. You see, people don't hate authenticity, they fear it. Because when someone truly authentic walks into a room, they change the atmosphere. You don't even have to say much. Your existence alone challenges the comfortable narratives that people have built around themselves. If you're disciplined, you make the lazy uncomfortable. If you're truthful, you make the dishonest uneasy. If you are strong, those who rely on excuses will resent you. And when you don't compromise, when you don't shrink yourself down to make them feel better, you become someone they can't handle. And this is where people misunderstand rejection. They think when others pull away, when they lose friends, when they are ostracized, it means something is wrong with them. But often it means the exact opposite. You were too real, you were too raw, you refused to play the game, and for that, you were cast out. Now, this is a painful experience. It hurts to be misunderstood. It hurts to be seen as too much when all you were trying to do was be honest, be direct, be real. But you must not let this make you bitter. You must not let their rejection convince you that you should be less than what you are. Because here's the thing, you were never meant to fit in with those who thrive on illusions. You were never meant to stay in a space where honesty is seen as a problem. If you lost people because you were too real, that's not a loss, it's a revelation. The right people, the ones who value truth, who respect integrity, who don't fear self-improvement, will find you. And when they do, you'll realize that being too real was never the problem. The real problem was that you spent too long trying to belong somewhere you never should have been in the first place. Authenticity is a rare thing. It requires courage because the moment you choose to be real, you become a mirror for those around you. And most people don't like what they see in the reflection. When you stand firm in your values, when you speak honestly without sugarcoating the truth, you disrupt the balance that others have carefully constructed. Many people live in a way that avoids discomfort. They avoid hard conversations. They avoid self-reflection. They avoid responsibility. And then you walk in unwilling to play pretend, unwilling to entertain the falsehoods they've surrounded themselves with. They don't know how to handle that. You will notice this in the way people react to you. Some will dismiss you, some will mock you, and some will avoid you altogether. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because your presence forces them to confront their own contradictions. When you are disciplined, you expose the laziness in those who make excuses. When you are honest, you make those who thrive on deception uneasy. When you take responsibility for your actions, you highlight the irresponsibility of those who blame everything but themselves. This is why authenticity is intimidating. It doesn't allow people to hide. There is a cost to being real. The cost is that you will make enemies without trying, you will be misunderstood, you will be labeled as difficult, and you will be called too intense, too blunt, too much. But this is not a reflection of your character. It's a reflection of how people react when they are not ready for the truth. Many would rather push you away than question themselves, because questioning themselves means they have to change, and change is uncomfortable. It is much easier to reject you than to confront their own weaknesses. But you must not let this deter you. The world does not need more people who hide behind masks. It does not need more voices that say what is easy instead of what is true. It needs more people willing to disrupt the comfortable illusions that keep others stagnant. It needs more people like you, people who refuse to dilute their authenticity for the sake of making others feel comfortable. People don't just dislike the truth, they fear it. Truth is not soft, it is not gentle, and it does not make allowances for the fragile ego. It demands accountability, it demands growth, and it demands change. And most people are not ready for that. They would rather live in a carefully constructed reality where their flaws are hidden, where their weaknesses are ignored, and where their failures are always someone else's fault. The moment truth enters the picture, all of that crumbles. It strips away the comforting illusions, leaving only what is real, what is raw, and what can no longer be denied. And that is terrifying. This is why people resist truth so aggressively. It is not because they don't recognize it. It's because deep down they do, and that recognition forces them to make a choice. Either accept the truth and change, or reject it and stay the same. The second option is easier. It requires no effort, no introspection, and no discomfort. And so, rather than confronting the reality of their own shortcomings, they turn their discomfort outward. They resent the truth bearer instead of the truth itself. They will call you arrogant, judgmental, insensitive, anything to discredit you so they don't have to listen. It is not your honesty that offends them. It is the fact that your honesty exposes the lies they have told themselves. If they have built their life around self-pity, your resilience is a threat. If they have built their identity around victimhood, your refusal to complain is an insult. If they have surrounded themselves with shallow affirmations and easy comforts, your unwillingness to indulge their fantasies is an attack. They will resist you not because you are wrong, but because accepting your presence means accepting everything they have tried to avoid. And so they push back, they distance themselves, they label you as too much because you refuse to pretend. They would rather live in a lie than face the discomfort of growth. But their rejection does not mean you are wrong, it means they are afraid. Afraid of the mirror you hold up, afraid of the change that truth demands, and afraid that once they see reality for what it is, they will never be able to unsee it. You don't even have to say a word. Your presence alone can make people uncomfortable. The way you carry yourself, the way you refuse to conform, the way you don't seek validation from the crowd, it all sends a message, whether you intend it to or not. People sense it when you have a standard, when you refuse to compromise on what you believe, when you are not easily swayed by peer pressure or the opinions of the masses. And for those who have built their lives around external validation, that is unsettling, because your existence reminds them of everything they are not. If you are disciplined, those who lack discipline will feel exposed in your presence. If you take responsibility for your life, those who make excuses will feel defensive. If you are driven, those who are stagnant will feel judged, without you ever needing to say a single word. They will accuse you of arrogance, of being self-righteous, of thinking you are better than them. But in reality, you have simply chosen a path that forces them to question their own choices. And rather than face that discomfort, they choose to resent you. This is why people will sometimes dislike you for no apparent reason. It is not about what you've done, it is about what you represent. You represent effort in a world that rewards complacency. You represent discipline in a culture that celebrates indulgence. You represent truth in a society that thrives on convenient lies. And because of that, you become a target. People will try to cut you down, not because you have wronged them, but because your very existence forces them to look inward, and they don't like what they see. But you cannot dim your light just to make others feel comfortable. You cannot make yourself small so that others don't feel inadequate. The world does not need more people who conform to mediocrity just to be liked. It needs people who are willing to disrupt the status quo simply by existing as their full, unfiltered selves. And if your presence alone makes some people uncomfortable, let it. It only means that you are living in a way that demands attention, reflection, and ultimately change. Rejection is often misinterpreted as failure, as if being excluded or pushed away means that something is wrong with you. But what if rejection is not a reflection of your flaws, but a confirmation of your strength? What if people don't distance themselves because you lack something, but because you possess something they are not ready to face? When you live with conviction, when you refuse to bend your principles to fit in, when you hold yourself to a higher standard, you will inevitably make people uncomfortable. And rather than rise to meet that standard, most will choose the easier path to walk away. The truth is, when you are real, when you speak honestly, when you don't engage in mind games or superficiality, you remove the option for pretense. You strip away the false comfort that people create for themselves. Those who thrive in illusions cannot function in your presence. It is easier for them to label you as too intense rather than admit that their way of living is shallow. It is easier for them to paint you as the problem than to confront their own avoidance of truth. And so they reject you, not because you are wrong, but because you make them question everything they've been avoiding. When you see people drifting away, don't rush to chase them. Don't contort yourself to become more acceptable, more agreeable, more palatable. Every rejection is a filtration process, separating those who are aligned with your truth from those who never were. The people who leave when you stand firm were never meant to stay. Their departure is not a loss, it is clarity. It shows you who values authenticity and who prefers the safety of deception. It is a mistake to believe that blending in will bring happiness. You can sacrifice your authenticity for approval, but at what cost? The moment you start diluting yourself to keep people close, you have already lost. The relationships that truly matter, the ones that bring fulfillment and meaning, are built on respect for who you really are, not on your willingness to conform to what others expect. So when rejection comes, recognize it for what it is, not a failure, but a confirmation that you are living in a way that demands truth. And that is something many people simply cannot handle. Most people do not want real connections. They want comfortable ones. They want relationships where they are never challenged, never questioned, never forced to confront anything uncomfortable about themselves. They want affirmation, not truth. Validation, not accountability. And when you refuse to play along, when you demand honesty, depth, and integrity, they find you difficult. Not because you are unkind, but because you refuse to settle for surface-level interactions. This is why, despite being loyal, despite being genuine, despite giving your best, you will still be labeled as too much for certain people, because your presence alone requires a different level of engagement. You don't tolerate manipulation. You don't entertain dishonesty. You don't engage in gossip, in mind games, in the silent contracts that keep people trapped in shallow connections. And that makes you a problem for those who have built their lives around such things. It's not that you are the issue, it's that you make it impossible for them to continue pretending. People will call you difficult when they realize they cannot control you. They will call you intense when they realize they cannot deceive you. They will call you hard to deal with when they realize that their usual tactics, flattery, guilt, passive aggression, have no effect on you. The truth is, they are not used to someone who is firm, who sees through their games, who refuses to lower their standards just to be accepted. And so, instead of adjusting their own behavior, they label you as the problem. But understand this, the right people will never see your standards as a burden. The right people will appreciate your honesty instead of resenting it. They will respect your boundaries instead of testing them. They will see your strength as something to admire, not something to break down. And until you find those people, it is better to be misunderstood for your authenticity than to be accepted for a version of yourself that is not real. If your truth makes some people uncomfortable, so be it. It only means that your presence demands a level of sincerity that not everyone is ready to give. People are often drawn to authenticity in theory, but in practice it unsettles them. They admire the idea of someone who is real, someone who speaks the truth. someone who stands firm in their values, until they realize that person is standing in front of them, refusing to indulge their illusions. That is when admiration turns to discomfort. Because when you are real, you force people to see themselves clearly, and that is not always a pleasant experience. Many relationships are built on unspoken agreements. I won't challenge your lies if you don't challenge mine. I won't call out your weaknesses if you pretend mine don't exist. It's a silent contract of mutual denial where both parties agree to keep things shallow so they can avoid discomfort. But the moment you show up with authenticity, with clarity, with an unwillingness to participate in this game, you disrupt the entire structure. You force people to face what they've been running from, and their instinct is to resist, to push back, to distance themselves from you rather than confront themselves. This is why people will turn on you the moment they realize they cannot manipulate you, the moment they see that guilt will not work on you, that their passive-aggressive tactics will not break you, that their attempts to make you feel small will fail. They will accuse you of being cold, of being unfeeling, of being difficult, not because any of it is true, but because they have lost control over you. And control is what they rely on. Control is what allows them to keep their world intact without having to change. But understand this, when people walk away from you because you refuse to be manipulated, that is not rejection, that is liberation. It is proof that you are no longer available for one-sided relationships, for friendships built on convenience, for dynamics where you must shrink yourself to make others feel comfortable. It is not your job to make dishonesty feel safe. It is not your job to participate in someone else's delusion just so they can avoid discomfort. The people who truly value you will never require you to abandon yourself in order to keep them close. If your refusal to be controlled causes people to leave, let them go. They were never looking for connection. They were looking for submission. And you were never meant to live on your knees. When you are real, you will attract both admiration and resentment. Some will be inspired by your strength, drawn to your clarity, and uplifted by your ability to stand firm in who you are. But others will feel threatened because when you refuse to wear a mask, when you refuse to pretend, when you refuse to conform to what is convenient, you expose everything about them that is built on pretense. And nothing makes people more uncomfortable than being confronted with their own inauthenticity. It is easier for people to surround themselves with those who make them feel comfortable rather than those who make them think. They prefer the company of those who echo their fears rather than those who challenge them to rise above them. So when you walk into their lives with a different mindset, when you speak with conviction, when you refuse to participate in their self-deception, they feel an immediate need to push you away, to discredit you, not because you are wrong, but because if they accept that you might be right, they will have to change, and change is uncomfortable. This is why people will question your motives, twist your words, or try to find flaws in your character. They will tell themselves stories about you to justify their discomfort. They will paint you as arrogant, as self-righteous, as someone who thinks they know everything. Not because you claim to be superior, but because your existence challenges the carefully crafted lies they tell themselves. They would rather label you as too much than admit that they have been living too small. But here's what you must remember. Their perception of you is not your responsibility. It is not your job to make people comfortable at the expense of your own truth. If they are unsettled by your presence, if they cannot stand to be around you because you live in a way that demands authenticity, then that is their burden to carry. You are not responsible for their discomfort. You are only responsible for being who you are, fully and unapologetically. The right people will not be intimidated by your strength. They will not shrink in your presence. They will stand beside you as equals, as fellow seekers of truth. And anyone who cannot do that, anyone who would rather tear you down than rise to meet you, is simply revealing that they were never meant to walk with you in the first place. There is a cost to being real, and that cost is often loneliness. not because you are unworthy of connection, but because true connection requires truth, and truth is rare. When you refuse to engage in deception, when you refuse to smile at what disgusts you, when you refuse to tolerate behavior that disrespects you, when you refuse to betray yourself just to fit in, you will find that most people do not know how to handle you. They are used to environments where people say what is expected, not what is real, where people hide behind niceties instead of confronting issues head on, where people would rather maintain false peace than seek genuine understanding. And when you disrupt that, they will treat you as if you are the problem. You will notice that as you grow, as you refine your standards, as you develop an unshakable sense of self, the number of people who truly understand you will shrink, not because you are unlovable, but because depth is not for everyone. Most people seek validation, not truth. They want people around them who will tell them they are right even when they are wrong, who will applaud their stagnation instead of encouraging their growth, who will accommodate their weaknesses rather than challenge them to rise. But when you show up differently, when you hold yourself and others to a higher standard, you will find that many will choose to walk away rather than evolve. But understand this, loneliness is not the enemy. The real enemy is losing yourself just to be accepted. The real danger is shrinking your voice, dulling your light, suppressing your intelligence just to keep people comfortable. If the price of companionship is the abandonment of your own integrity, then that is too high a price to pay. Because at the end of the day, the only relationships that will ever truly matter are the ones built on mutual respect, shared values, and the courage to be real with one another. The loneliness that comes with being real is temporary. The isolation that follows high standards is fleeting. But the regret of living a life where you betray yourself just to be liked, that is a burden that lasts forever. So let them leave, let them misunderstand you, let them call you difficult, let them label you as too much, because in the end, the ones who are meant to walk with you will never ask you to be anything other than what you truly are. When you refuse to conform, when you refuse to mold yourself into something more digestible, more palatable, more convenient for others, you will be labeled as difficult, not because you are truly difficult, but because you do not fit into the neat little boxes people create to keep their world predictable and safe. Society rewards compliance, not authenticity. It values those who follow the script, not those who challenge it. And the moment you step outside of that, the moment you dare to think for yourself, to live according to your own principles, to reject the unspoken rules that demand you betray yourself for acceptance, you will find that people would rather call you the problem than question their own conditioning. They will tell you that you are too intense, that you take things too seriously, that you think too deeply. They will say you are exhausting, that you should lighten up, that you should not expect so much from life or from people. But what they are really saying is, you make me uncomfortable because you force me to think, to see, to feel. You are holding up a mirror that reflects back the contradictions I have learned to ignore. And rather than face that discomfort, I would rather push you away. This is why, in many cases, people who are real are also the most misunderstood. When you live with clarity, when you refuse to play the social games of flattery and false humility, when you do not hide your intelligence or soften your words to avoid ruffling feathers, you become a threat, not because you are cruel, not because you are wrong, but because you expose what is hidden. And people fear exposure more than anything. But here's what matters. You do not need to be understood by everyone. You do not need to be liked by those who would rather live in illusion than in truth. Being labeled as difficult by people who cannot handle reality is not an insult. It is a sign that you are standing firm in who you are. And while that might mean fewer friends, fewer easy interactions, fewer invitations into spaces where superficiality is the norm, it also means something greater: freedom. The freedom to live without pretense. The the freedom to know that the people who stay in your life are there for the real you, not a version of you that has been watered down for their comfort. And in the end, that is worth far more than the approval of those who fear what is real. There will come a moment when you realize that losing people was never really a loss. It was a clearing, a necessary shedding of what was never truly meant for you. Because when you are real, when you are honest, when you refuse to pretend, you do not lose people, you lose illusions. You lose the people who only liked the version of you that served them, the ones who stayed as long as you played along, as long as you nodded in agreement, as long as you never asked too many questions or demanded too much truth. And when you stopped, when you became fully yourself, they disappeared. Not because you changed for the worse, but because you finally stopped bending to fit into places you were never meant to be. At first, it feels like rejection. It feels like abandonment. It feels like you are standing alone in a world that does not know what to do with you. But in time, you come to understand that this was never about them leaving. It was about making room for those who actually see you. Because the people who truly belong in your life will not be intimidated by your depth. They will not shrink when you speak the truth. They will not punish you for refusing to play along with the unspoken rules of pretense and convenience. They will welcome you not in spite of your intensity, but because of it. They will meet you at your level, challenge you, grow with you, and respect you, not for being what is easy, but for being what is real. There is no true loss in being left by those who could not handle your authenticity. The real loss would have been losing yourself trying to keep them, and that is the mistake too many people make. They trade their truth for temporary company, their identity for fleeting approval. But what is left when the mask is all that remains? What kind of life is built on diluted conversations? On relationships where you have to censor yourself just to be tolerated? That is not connection. That is performance. And if you must perform just to be accepted, then you are not being accepted at all. You are being used. The reality is not everyone will understand you. Not everyone will value what you bring. But that is not a reason to diminish yourself. That is not a reason to settle. It is simply proof that you are meant for something greater. And when you stay true to that, when you refuse to compromise your essence for the comfort of others, you will find that the right people, the ones who see you, who hear you, who value you for exactly who you are, will always find their way to you. And when they do, you will realize that losing the wrong ones was the best thing that could have ever happened. So, in the end, the truth is simple. You were never too much. You were never the problem. You were just too real for people who preferred illusions. And that is not a flaw, it is a strength. Because the world does not need more people who conform, who shrink themselves, who trade authenticity for acceptance. It needs more people who stand firm in who they are, who refuse to compromise their values, who are willing to walk alone rather than lose themselves for the sake of belonging. Yes, being real comes with a cost. It means fewer friends, harder roads, and moments of solitude. But it also means freedom. It means clarity. It means knowing that whoever stands beside you is there for you, not for what you provide, not for what you pretend to be, but for who you truly are. And that is worth more than any approval, more than any shallow connection, more than any temporary sense of belonging. So let them go. Let them misunderstand you. Let them call you difficult, intense, or too much, because the right people, the ones who truly matter, will never ask you to be less. And when you find them, or when they find you, you will understand that losing the wrong ones was never a loss at all. It was just the beginning of finding